coalition forces and begin striking selected targets of military importance.
It would be a decision which could only be taken once.
There's no argument over the choice between peace and war.
Unconfirmed reports about Gaddafi being captured.
This morning, I want to talk about the future of Europe.
Burning Point.
Hello and welcome to the show with me, Ekaterina Kudashkina. On Tuesday, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a treaty making Crimea officially part of Russia. During a televised address, he pointed out that 82% of Crimea's residents turned out for Sunday's referendum and more than 96% of them voted to join Russia. He said the vote was, like he put it, quite convincing and was held in full accordance with democratic procedures and international legal norms. However, US Vice President Joe Biden has arrived in Poland on a two-day mission in Eastern Europe aimed at reassuring allies that Washington understands their anxieties about Ukraine and will protect them if needed. So why would the US allies need to be protected? And how do people in Europe view the crisis? Today our guest speaker is Jürgen Elsässer, political analyst and journalist based in Germany.
The majority of Germans is not on the line of NATO headquarters and on the line of Washington and London. Germans at the moment are not in a Cold War fever, and most of my countrymen know very exactly that Putin is not like Brezhnev or like Stalin and so on. I don't think that the majority of Germans are pro-Russian or something like that, but we know that in the last years Russia was a defender of status quo and of international law, and by the way, Russia and even the former Soviet Union always was a good economical partner for us. So the majority of my countrymen, we are not in the mood for sanctions, and we don't want to pay higher prices for oil and gas to save American interests.
Oh, you said American interests, but when I was watching the developments in Maidan, and when I was discussing them with the Western experts, when I asked why would they support fascists, well, that's who they are, fascists. The people who come from all kinds of ultra-nationalist parties in Ukraine and who are now members of the so-called government, they don't see them as fascists. How do we explain that?
Okay, that is NATO propaganda. They always speak of Arabian Spring and of Ukrainian Spring and of freedom fighters and of Twitter revolution and of young people fighting for democracy. That's always the same story, and the same way they forgot in Egypt that the hardcore of this Arabic Spring were the Muslim Brotherhood. They forget now, in italics, they forget now that the hardcore of the demonstrations in Kiev on Maidan was formed by fascists. Perhaps they betray the public in America and in Europe. Perhaps they also betray themselves. It is unclear if they believe in their own lies. That is unclear. But the fact that these extremists play a very important role in the putsch government, it is obvious. And in Germany, also in politics, in the government, in the parties, in Bundestag, this fact is known. But the leaders of the government around Chancellor Merkel, they say, okay, we know it, but we hope that these fascists will lose their importance during the forming of a government and after the elections in May. That is what they hope.
If we start talking about what's going on in Ukraine, like you said, the country is heading towards economic chaos, right? And this actually reinforces all kinds of extremist and fascist movements. Yep. Why would Europe want something in its eastern borders when it hands full of problems with fascists and with ultra-rightist movements with their rise over the past years?
Yes, I guess we have two kinds of calculations, one in Brussels and Berlin and the other in Washington and perhaps London. The calculation in the European Union was to bring Ukraine in the backyard of Europe and then try to stabilize the situation and to westernize Ukraine and so on. This was a naive calculation, but it was different from the calculation in Washington. The European Union was interested in having Ukraine as a whole and to keep it in the backyard and to care for it, let's say. The American calculation is totally different. They are not interested in Ukraine as a whole because America is bankrupt and cannot invest anything in Ukraine. So the only interest of the Americans is to create chaos at the front line to Russia and to bring their rockets and their weapons and their fleet in the Ukrainian position to threaten Russia. That is the difference.
You pronounced a key word, which is chaos. And if you look at it, every time they come over to, to a region, in some time the region is up in flames. Just look, they declared their pivot to Asia a couple of years ago. Now we have something which looks like a typical Orange Revolution in Thailand, for one. One of the reasons could be, the containment of China, because Chinese have huge investment plans in Thailand or whatever. But do they really still pursue that policy of controlled chaos?
The problem is we should not only differentiate between Western Europe and the United States, we should also make a difference inside the American establishment. I have the impression that driving force behind those chaos strategies is not President Obama, but kind of rogue elements in the secret services and the military, for example, this Blackwater company. And all these mercenaries who create false flag terrorism and who perhaps could be behind the sniper attacks on Maidan. It's unclear if they are sent by the White House, meaning Obama, or if these private sectors who also were not in favor of Obama from the beginning behind these attacks. This should be looked into more deeply.
This is Burning Point. We're exploring the logic behind the Western foreign policy strategy with our guest speaker Jürgen Elsässer, journalist and political analyst based in Germany. Are you saying that perhaps what we are witnessing in the whole of the world for something like almost 8 years is a result of the opposition to President Obama by certain circles in the secret services in the US?
Yes, it's the old Bush strategy of George W. Bush, Rumsfeld, Cheney, and these the commandos of special forces. Obama tried to remove the top positions and bring in his own guys in these commando positions, but he did not succeed in every point. So there are still old guys of the Rumsfeld era in these crucial points. This could be the reason for this mess. Look at the Syrian crisis when we had the big crisis, the military threats, end of August, beginning September last year. And pushing for the war was AIPAC, meaning the Zionist lobby organization, which influenced most of the senators normally. And they tried to push for the attack against Syria with cruise missiles, and the American Sixth Fleet was already in position on the Syrian coast. But in the very last moment, Obama took the proposal of Russia, and then they made an agreement on a balanced situation. That was Obama. So at the last moment, in a very critical situation, Obama came back to not to a peace policy, but he did not want to jump into the abyss. So he's a pragmatic imperialist. But these other guys, AIPAC, which wanted to push him into the abyss, these are the real criminal elements.
But in that case, how does that comply with the long-term policy planning? Because this style was just the style which we have seen in Yugoslavia. That was so many years ago, 15 years ago, under Clinton. But somehow the approach is similar.
The approach is similar, but the level of aggression now is higher because the Balkans was, in comparison to the global situation, a small problem. Mm-hmm. And it's the only part of the world where now there is not a big chaos, but a quite stable situation. Even in Kosovo, which is a cradle of mafia, we have a relatively quiet situation. But certain patterns are similar, let's say, yeah? And if you remember, in 1999, before NATO began with bombing Yugoslavia, there was, like now, Henry Kissinger, who strongly opposed it.
But that didn't help, did it?
That didn't help, but that shows that there are certain factions inside the American establishment.
With all those episodes forming some kind of trend, what could be the ultimate goal? The trend is still there. What is the ultimate goal of those guys? Is it some kind of a civilizational war? Is it some kind of grand project targeting Russia? Or is it something else?
I guess the hardcore faction, the Falcons, they see that the final enemy is in the east, in the alliance between Russia and China. So they try to build up positions militarily to strangle Russia, and they would even attack Crimea or the south border of Russia in the coming weeks if something happens more. But that is not the position of Obama. Obama and the so-called not-so-crazy faction, their aim is to use military threats, not to wage war, but only, in italics, but only to create an atmosphere of Cold War, meaning of to freeze the temperature between East and West. And the aim of this Cold War policy is to force Western Europeans, especially the relatively rich country Germany, to spend more for American interests and especially for NATO weapons, NATO structures, and to help the Americans economically. So the difference between the faction is the Falcons really want war, and people like Obama, they don't want war, but they want to use the Cold War situation to push on their own allies in Western Europe to squeeze more money out of them.
Do you think that even in this difficult situation, we can reverse it to a win-win scenario?
The situation, the probability is not very high, but in difference to the end of the 90s, speaking about Yugoslavia and the war in 1999, in difference to then, the United States are economically very weak. They have a lot of debts, and the main creditor of the American debt is the People's Republic of China. So if let's say the Alliance for Peace in the world, meaning the BRICS states and including Russia and China and India and South Africa, if they begin to threaten the dollar by the threat to sell out dollars, you have $3 trillion in the safes of the People's Republic of China, for example. This threat did not exist in 1999. So if the war faction inside the U.S. establishment would begin to escalate the situation, the Alliance for Peace could show them a controversial threat, an economical threat, and by this way tame the American policy.
Thank you so much. And just to remind you, our guest speaker was Jürgen Elsässer, journalist and political analyst based in Germany. Well, and with this we end this edition of Burning Point, brought to you by me, Katerina Kudashkina. Thank you so much for staying with us. Goodbye, and take care.